to South Summit from day one, 14 years ago, and it's the colors. Did you notice what colors Maria Benjumea was wearing? Did you notice what colors Liz was wearing? Did you notice the colors of my suspenders? These are the colors of what? España. And so I would like everyone to give a big hand of applause to this amazing country. Viva España. I don't think you all realize what a great country you have. And you realize that when you travel and you go places. So I think we're about to begin. Let me just check that everything is set for our next panel here. Are we ready? All right. And so this next fireside chat is going to be between Margot Miller. Margot Miller is probably one of the most famous TED speakers. Her last TED got over 300,000 views. She is the queen of connections and networking. And today she's here with Dorothy Chow, who's the director of the Google DeepMind Center for Public Engagement. And they're going to talk about how AI can help society. Yep, you heard that, how AI is going to help society. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Margot and Dorothy.
Closer. We're breaking the rules, so
breaking the rules.
Closer
Sorry.
to each other. You feel too far away for this great conversation we're going to have. Okay, everyone. Dorothy Chow, Google DeepMind. She's the director of policy and public engagement.
Yes.
Which means she's actually out there helping change the conversation around what's happening with AI. Of course, we all come on these stages. There's lots of conversations about large language model battles and what the next time-saving thing for your life is going to be. And we're not going to talk about that today. I mean, it might come up, but it might not be in the angle that you hope. We're gonna talk about the science, how we can actually make a real change in society, how science can make a big difference, and AI and science together can do that. And so I don't want to waste time. I want to get right into the guts with you, Dorothy. So what are we seeing in AI, and what's like being overlooked? What's being looked at wrong? Like, let's just start right in the guts of it.
I mean, I think we're way over-indexed on chatbots. Like, do we need another one? So it's
Right.
really interesting to look at what AI is actually good at its core, and think through what it can do for society. So what it's really good at is prediction, like better predictions. And so when you think about how to forecast in a really complex time or create more control in a volatile time, you start to think like, this is actually what we need to create more resilience, both at the human level and at the societal level. So when you're thinking about things from public health crises all the way to flood and fire, all the way to food, water, and energy security, this is the next big growth market. And governments, insurers, cities, like health systems are all going to need to adapt as they're under increased pressure. And so we really need AI to help us think that through. And I'd like us to think about AI in a way that's not just extractive, but also protective, and in ways that defend society and not just optimize it.
It's a beautiful sentiment, what you're saying. What's our roadblock? Like, why are we not getting there already? What do you think has been in the way?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. I think one is that we're in a world of information overload, right? And so we're not really able to get there. Two, I would say we also seem to look at a lot of these hard issues as special interests, so let's just fund it and make it go away. Let a small group of people work on it and solve it while we go to this other direction. And I also think investments tend to go, they're like water, right? They flow where things are easiest. And when AI is poised to have a big difference in regulated sectors like health, energy, education, transportation, finance, these actually require working with experts. If you remember Google search and it first came out, it was just better than anything that was out there. You could put it into any market and it would probably work better than what you had there before. That's not necessarily true for AI. You have to actually get experts in the room to understand if it's working the right ways or not. And so that kind of human collaboration that we have to create isn't as easy as people might think.
So we're kind of like excited about what the potential of this tool is, but then we're just going with it, investing in it, as opposed to actually like making sure it's grounded and being like backed, and then, like you say, coming back in and kind of checking on it.
Yeah, and actually making a difference where we want it to make a difference in most. I think we have to be very intentional about creating markets just as much as we are about investing in the technology itself.
Okay, so in terms of investing in the technology, if we're just looking at AI and science as a broad topic, and maybe this is like a new topic for some people where the audience might be thinking, what does that even mean, AI and science? Like, what is the thing that actually can happen? What's exciting you about that?
I mean, it's just the breadth of the application space. You have health and the idea of like non-invasive diagnoses for things like endometriosis, which affects so many women and creates so much pain and usually takes 10 years to diagnose surgically. So you can actually reduce that down to an AI MRI-driven diagnosis, all the way to understanding whether certain genetic mutations are actually problematic or if they're benign. So that's health. Then you have climate applications all the way from, methane-free cows, which is something we're working on with Nobel laureate Jennifer Doudna's lab, all the way to fusion and clean energy solutions, and then even robotics. I mean, I talked to a company this week based in Europe that's actually creating the tiniest mini robots that can go through your brain and actually help with delivering brain cancer treatment that was nearly impossible before.
Because it can get to the areas better.
Yeah, exactly. Right now, you have your skull. It's really hard to navigate. The blood pathways are really constricted. And so thinking through what new innovations can be possible across the board, I feel like the breadth of applications is something that leaves us all with a lot to be curious about.
Yes, that, like, literally the word curious, I think, is a perfect one. I was thinking I need to even do more research when we leave here and get into that. And you were part with Google DeepMind while you've been there. They had a big revelation around protein folding, and there was a Nobel Prize for that too. That must excite you as well.
Yeah, protein folding is a weird thing. It's not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, if you all remember in COVID, when you had the coronavirus, the reason it was called corona was because there was a spike that all the different drugs were binding to. That spike is a protein. And so what we were able to do is deliver all 200 million known protein shapes in one single go. To give you a sense of the time savings there, it used to take a lot of very expensive equipment and 4 years of a single PhD to find even one form of a protein. So we basically saved, like, back of the envelope, about 1 billion years of research.
Just about 1 billion.
I mean, it's kind of crazy. And the kinds of diseases that are related to protein folding, by the way, are very common. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's. And so
things that affect a lot of our family members.
A lot of family
us.
members, exactly.
Yeah. So it's such an interesting topic. It's exciting. Like, to me, I'm like, I want to ask you a million more questions just about the ways it can be applied to science. But so why does that leave us in this position still where there's so little visibility? Like, this is, one of the first panels where we're talking about this science side that I've seen lately at a bunch of events. Like, why is that the case? Why is it not so visible?
What's funny is that science used to be much more visible in society.
Science used to be cool?
Well, yeah, I mean, think about like the moon landing and how invested we were in that, or after World War II when we built NASA, or in England we built the NHS. It used to be a societal project, and now it's kind of like relegated to back corners where people don't want to think about it. And one of the things I've been studying is thinking through, when there are accelerated scientific breakthroughs, we call that a renaissance, and when there aren't, we call that the Dark Ages. And so it's actually really important for us to think about the pace of scientific progress in society as an indicator of how healthy is this society? How curious are we? How are we thinking through the kinds of problems that are facing us, and how fast are we solving those problems?
Yeah. Okay, so to solve problems fast, we often need money. So
just a little.
Right, just a little. And we know a lot of AI work costs a lot of money, and we see that VCs, and capital allocators are putting money into some of these kind of faster runway projects, let's just say, maybe. What are they misunderstanding about the long-term bet in AI and science?
Well, it's funny you say faster runway, because I would argue deep tech is not a fast runway either.
No,
There's
it's
tons
not.
of money
Deep
going
tech's
there.
not. You're right. Yeah.
So, look, it's not niche. That's what they need to understand. I think, when you look at the product market fit of something like AlphaFold, which was verified by the Nobel Prize, versus a lot of things that are being invested in today where we're not sure of product market fit, that's really a big question. I think the second piece is that the total addressable market is huge. Like I just laid out, there's so many applications for science, it really underpins everything. And then when you think about the third piece, which is science at scale, which is finally enabled by AI, it can make such a big difference so quickly.
To me, it seems like if VCs or funding, like allocators, capital allocators are open to this, that if they're not in some kind of science vein, it's a missed opportunity because it's going to be, and we know in the medical industry, healthcare industry, there's a lot of money to be made. So how do we get them to stop investing in the same things over and over and actually like shift over? Because to me, it seems obvious when I hear you talk, right?
Look, it's the question I think VCs should be asking themselves, and the question I asked myself when I started angel investing is, what you invest in shows what you believe about the future. Do you believe it should be incremental or stay as it is, or do you believe things should change? And so you have to start thinking about investing in different types of founders, thinking about whose imaginations you want to make real. I think that to date, we've not had the spread of imaginations that I would like to see personally. And you have to think through, what are the problems actually worth solving? Some of these problems are incredibly incremental. We talk a lot at DeepMind about what is an AI-shaped problem that's worth solving. One, it has to have great data or a great simulator. Two, it should be moving through a big combinatorial space. And three, there should ideally be somebody outside the company setting up the standard of what good looks like. Right? With AlphaFold, we had the Nobel Committee. We had a whole set of competitions that were established by other scientists to say, this is the target we're trying to reach. And I think government and society can play a huge role in that versus tech deciding that for ourselves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, so when you are even investing yourself, because you do this, you're an angel investor with Ada Ventures, yes?
Yes, and on my own with Ada, I'm a venture partner. They're very proud to be there.
Perfect, okay.
Yes.
So does this inform what you're personally investing in? I mean, you had a beautiful sentence just now that it was quotable. I hope someone wrote it down about, it's like what you invest in is what you believe in the future. It was better than that, so someone find that after. But how does it influence what you're investing in?
I mean, I'll just say, and I would say the thing, angels are different from VCs, obviously, in that angels, we get to be more selective about what we want to do personally, and then VCs have to return to their funders. All of that said, I don't invest in things that are just wrappers on other foundation models. I'm trying to look for real innovation. So whether that's innovation in the market, so for example, there's a company in the UK that I'm looking at right now that I'm really interested in because they're looking at drug delivery totally differently. And what I mean by that is, if you look at pharma, there's a ton of great drug candidates that they have, potentially for rare or neglected diseases, that just never get to market because to them, it's not worth the money.
Yeah.
And so this company is looking at, wait a minute, we're doctors, we can use AI. Can we buy up some of these candidates and just help bring them to market? Like, can we look at these assets in a totally different way and finance that? I'm looking also at another company in California where the founder did a PhD where she looked at roundworms as proxies for our human bodies. And she was noticing, wait, they're kind of communicating with each other using these chemicals. And I'm going to oversimplify it, but she also looked at, in the Western world, autoimmune disorders, asthma and allergies started going through the roof when we eliminated worms from our diet. And today, Africa is the continent with the least amount of autoimmune disorders like lupus or asthma or allergies. Why is that? And so what she was able to do was figure out, well, obviously people don't want to eat worms, but how do we take how they communicated and bring that into our bodies so that we can potentially have much higher quality of life? Like, I'm looking for those kinds of founders who are looking at big problems. And frankly, that's proprietary information, a great investment.
Wow. the examples that you have are so perfect for us to understand the opportunities of what to invest in. I think it's really interesting. I was going to ask you, we had talked about some of our questions in advance, and I was going to get you to give us a 30-second pitch on how to get investors to invest in AI and science. I feel like you've already given it to us, but do you have something you want to add?
Totally, I do. First is that science offers you max optionality. So when we talk about, especially seed stage founders, we're talking about people who can pivot. If you're investing in new materials, for example, you can make a climate case for that, and you can also make a national security case for that. There are so many ways to pivot in the market. I think second, these are recession-proof problems. They're not going to change in terms of how necessary they are, whether the economy goes up or down, so you don't have that kind of impact, and they're only going to become more urgent. And the third is that these things are expert-driven. So you have like full-stack verticals being created. You have a lot of platform revenues happening across the board, especially in drug discovery. And so what you have is proprietary methods, data, or distribution that makes it a great moat. So I think it's a great investment.
Check, check, check. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Okay, so now we're obviously in Europe. We're having this conversation here. We have great reasons, great examples. Is Europe positioned to lead this new world of AI science?
Well, I always say Europe is the home of the Nobel, which is a great indication. You've also got great institutions. I mean, we partner with EPFL in Switzerland with DeepMind, the Curie Institute at Google, the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. There's so many great institutions, so much great talent. And what I also say is that the difference, because I am from the States, is that you also have a social and economic fabric that creates the ability for founders to take more risk. Like in the US, if you leave your job, you don't have healthcare. Here, all of that's taken care of. There's a lot of stability for you to be able to take those kinds of risks. So I think asking why, if you're not, is a good question. I also think if you look at the healthcare system, and I met a company in France that is literally trying to understand biopsies of tumors and correlate that with different genetic indicators. And they're able to do that because there's one healthcare system. In the States, we don't have that. And so I think it's really amazing what you're able to do in terms of data sets. Our 200 million known protein structure data set is hosted at the European Bioinformatics Institute. And what you can see is results, right? Like BioNTech, for example, Isomorphic Labs, which is our sister company in the UK, all the way through to Novo Nordisk. There is a pathway here. I think the question is, what do you want to achieve, and how do we get there with Europe from a translation perspective within the lab all the way into startups and then bigger companies?
Yeah. I mean, these problems that we're talking about in science, they're global challenges.
Yes.
But a lot of conferences, a lot of conversations are about like sovereignty, keeping what you're working on. There's obviously like challenges in different markets right now in the world. So talking about that a little bit, like, is it a challenge? Is it just an opportunity?
Huge opportunity. I mean, if you look at the cuts towards science funding happening, the US government used to be the biggest funder of science in the world, usually annually $200 billion invested in science every year, and they really catalyze it. And the EU, by comparison, is about half, so it's about 100 billion euros, and I think that could definitely go up. In VC, altogether across both continents, about 80 billion, and then you're looking at philanthropy financing about 10 billion. So I think there's a real gap there from a funding perspective that we will need to fill in some way, somehow, here in Europe. I also look at, President Macron and what he's able to do in terms of bringing scientists who want to come over to Europe to do their work over, and I find that very encouraging. I think as we want to create environments where science can flourish, plenty of people want to come over. So I think it's about time to basically figure out the funding, grab that talent, and really figure out how we can move at scale and at pace.
And it's an exciting time.
It's an exciting time.
So what is Europe doing right then? So they need maybe a little more funding. What are they doing right versus some of these other markets, or is there anywhere else they need to kind of like push further?
I mean, Europe has such a great opportunity in, like I said, in the structure itself. I think we have to think about investing slightly differently from Silicon Valley and play to our strengths. There are plenty of governments that actually run 60% of the entire economy in Europe. So the question is, why aren't we getting AI into public services and back into serving people in government? And so I would look at public procurement as a real vector for being able to develop industries, keep them here, I also look at data and infrastructure as something that Europe can really do well. How do you think about formatting data in the right ways? We have systems at Google DeepMind that help save Google itself, I think, up to 30% of overall energy costs for their data centers. But when we tried to take those systems outside of Google, it was really hard because in other industrial centers, the data wasn't formatted as perfectly as we did it. So there's these questions about what does a good data library look like for AI uptake from an infrastructure perspective. And I wouldn't discount education either as a major component. And what I'm saying is not necessarily K-12, although that is important. But when you look at the time lag in which it takes to basically diffuse and take up these technologies, I'll give you an example. It took about 150 to 200 years for the microscope to be fully realized in terms of how useful it was. By contrast, PCR technologies, which you might remember with COVID swab and then basically be able to test in-house, that was adopted within 5 years in the 90s. And so we should think about why that is and what the public-private collaboration it takes to really facilitate much faster adoption of these technologies.
And I'm sure we could have a whole conversation about public-private and how we should collaborate and all these things. And there's probably some later on the stage today.
Totally.
So we won't get into that too deeply. But are you seeing some really cool examples of how that's already in play? Like putting you on the spot there. Do you have one?
Yeah, I mean, think about COVID vaccines and how we got them. You know, there was a mechanism that's used in policy called the advanced market commitment. And what governments were telling places like Pfizer and BioNTech is, if you can create a COVID vaccine, we can guarantee that we will purchase this amount. So you basically are underwriting the risk that science needs to take. And I think that is such an underutilized mechanism that governments can say, actually, I'm looking at AI, and I don't want it just going towards chatbots. I want it going towards these societal goals.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more that governments can be doing to steer the market and collaborating with private institutions to figure out what's possible and how do we accelerate the things that we're really needing.
It's really exciting. Like, is cancer next? Can we solve that in the next few years?
I mean, I do have some investments in companies that are really looking closely at cancer. Obviously, there's so many different like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in terms of clinical trials, but I think we have a lot to look forward to.
Good. I hope so.
Yeah.
All right. What's your message to investors? And we're just going to kind of do some like calls to action here as we get toward the end. But what's your message to investors in terms of what they should like rethink or reallocate?
You know, I'd love it if we don't just follow the hype.
Yeah.
You know, actually skate to where, in the US, we would say hockey, skate to where the puck is going, right? Look at what's happening in the world and invest in founders who are seeing the world really differently based on their lived experience. A lot of people like to take lower risks and just invest in what everybody else is investing in because they don't want to be left behind. But I don't know, I kind of look at it like kids soccer, right? Or kids football. You're all running after the same ball instead of figuring out how to play actual positions.
Yeah. Okay, and then what about the government side of things? What would be your message to them?
Figure out procurement, make it easier. I mean, startups have to make trade-offs. They're either good at contracts or they're good at building the technology. Ideally, that is simplified so they can focus on good technology that's going to get through the contracts.
A lot of our procurement just takes too much time right now.
Oh my gosh,
Too
well,
much
I
paperwork.
mean, these companies really are tiny and they need to figure out how to scale. And so it's a disproportionate amount of time. And I think if you really want to get the best tech into public services, what you risk when you're wasting time on contracts is you have a company that's just good at contracts, you get bad AI into your healthcare system, the doctors don't trust it, and then you have a whole different set of problems.
Yeah.
So really it's about working together to make that much easier so that startups can flourish in Europe.
Perfect. Okay. I want to do a speed round with you now because this is just fun.
Let's do it.
So let's see. So one word, one sentence, nice and quick, just to give us what first comes to mind, all right?
Okay.
So what's one AI hype trend that we need to get over?
Just backing the same people over and over again. I mean, the number of people who text me and they're like, this DeepMind or OpenAI founder is leaving, like they're going to build something. And I'm like, he's a researcher who's never built a product before. Like you really think through who you're backing. A lot of the women I see leaving Google DeepMind, for example, with the same exact technical credentials and are actually solving real problems are having much harder times finding investors. So, you know, just really think about who you're backing.
Pay attention out there.
Yep.
All right, next one. What's a scientific breakthrough that you hope AI will accelerate?
Rare neglected diseases that otherwise would never get addressed because there's very little funding for that. And I think some of them are the more crucial of problems. One of the problems that I helped bring AlphaFold to solve or to just start to address affected 2x the number of people who died in COVID. And the reason it wasn't addressed was simply because it was in the global south. So there you go.
Making science cool again. What would you say to someone who thinks that AI in science is too slow?
I mean, do you think deep tech is too slow?
Perfect.
It's about the same.
Can you name a policy move that gave you optimism?
Yes, so the vaccines advanced market commitments was my big one, I think. The second one is actually during the Biden administration when they did something called the Inflation Reduction Act, which Europe wasn't excited about, but it actually created about $369 billion worth of investment into green tech driven by AI. And so I would really have governments think through what are the different incentives you can set up for these industries to be created and new markets to pop up. And the third one, obviously, is the visas that are coming out of France. I think they're amazing to get scientists over.
Okay, awesome. If AI is your co-pilot in science, what's its personality?
Oh, I want it to be like this really kind challenger.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about optical illusions, you know, the one where you either see a rabbit or a duck or an old woman or a young woman, I want AI to say, like, hey, like, look at it this way. Now what do you see?
Yeah.
That's what I want it to be able to do.
I love that. In one word, what's the future of AI for science really about?
I think it's maybe catalytic. Catalytic for society, catalytic for the field, catalytic for like how we live.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Dorothy, last question for you. You can take your time on this one. It's okay. Thank you for your speed round participation.
Yeah.
When you think about the future of AI and science, not just in terms of what we build, but why we're building it, what gives you hope for what we're going to see?
You know, it's funny. I think a lot of people are worried that AI will eliminate human connection and empathy. But I actually see it so differently. You know, when I think about the problems that we're able to use AI to solve for the people we love, whether that's Alzheimer's, addressing cancer, addressing, you know, if you care about big populations, huge weather changes that are coming and helping them to predict for natural disasters. I think it's actually incredibly societally important and very empathetic, and it's a way that we can live that out if we decide to deploy it in ways that are meaningful for the world.
So really, truly, possibly one of the greatest levers for impact is what we can do now with AI and science together.
Yeah, we got to choose it. So, yeah.
We got to choose it, everyone. All right, that is the time that we have. Dorothy and I will be later eating some worms in the lobby, making sure we don't get any of these diseases. Dorothy, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks so much, Margot.